It is the UCLA Bruins. Fresh, what a long way we have come. I think back to what was it, maybe our second or third episode, we talked about Chip Kelly possibly being fired at UCLA. And now for what, the third straight year they're making our top 25?
Yeah, going into 2021, there was a lot of unknowns of what Chip Kelly was bringing to this program. He had been there for a couple of years at that point. Hadn't had the success yet. We were still waiting for it to finally bubble to the surface. And then 21, they had some success. Obviously, got that beat down of LSU in the opener that year, and they sort of carried it on with a plethora of great running backs and DTR at the helm. Um, but all the things, they're all gone this year. And this is going to be a really big transition. Was that the small window for Chip Kelly and his successor at UCLA, or they were able to continue to layer on and build and build and build? Um, you kind of look at it where they have five quarterbacks right now in the mix, and I use the mix term loosely, going into summer camp. My bet is on the five-star recruit Dante Moore to take over, but you never know how they're going to run, who's going to be able to understand Chip Kelly's system and be able to play at the best. Another name to be, to remember is Colin Shalee, who's a transfer coming from the MAC. He had success in the MAC is one thing. He was able to be that dual threat. He might be getting mixed into the UCLA quarterback conversation more often than not, especially if Moore struggles as a freshman. But I think that's the first item that Chip Kelly and this UCLA offense and his team need to address is getting that continuity at quarterback and figuring it out.
Yeah, they're going to miss not having DTR back there. Robinson was just an explosive player. Wound up getting picked by the Cleveland Browns. Another thing that they're missing is Zach Charbonnet there. But they got the Ball State transfer, Carson Steele, here. And I've been impressed when I started looking back of what he was doing over there in the MAC. Now it's time. He's transferring to UCLA after his sophomore year, and he's going to get a chance to play with the big boys. You talked about the quarterback situation there. To me, it's coming down between two people. Do they go with Ethan Garbers, who has been the quarterback there? He was the backup to DTR last year. Had a better completion percentage, but again, 2 for 2 when it came to interception and touchdown ratio there. I'm a little nervous about that one. Dante Moore, though, the 5-star out of and I had where he was out of there, but he was out of, Michigan. So all the way from Michigan coming through into Southern California. Dante Moore originally seemed like he was going to the Wolverines, and then he winds up originally committed to Oregon, and then backs out of his commitment to Oregon. And then goes over to UCLA. If you're taking a look at 24/7 right now, there are three quarterbacks that are the only three that are 100% 5-star recruits in the entire country. Nico down there in Tennessee, and good luck on us trying to pronounce that last name when he eventually becomes the starter. And a guy down there in Austin, Texas, maybe you might have known of him, name's Archie Manning. He's over there in Texas. Those are the only three quarterbacks that are 100% 5-star. Dante Moore, I think, is going to get his opportunity there in Westwood. I think he's going to have an opportunity to play. But I think the biggest get for UCLA is J. Michael Stuvant coming in from Cal. Impressive season for the Golden Bears, 65 catches for him. He wound up with just over 750 yards, 7 touchdowns, was probably their number one receiving target. There's a lot of moving pieces. I think that when you talk to me a little bit here, Fresh, about saying that UCLA is going to have to rely on defense, I think that they're going to have to rely on defense early in that season. That Utah game very early on is going to really be the breaking point of whether or not this UCLA offense can come together. They're looking at Utah to open up Pac-12 play in Week 4.
Well, I think you mentioned Carson Steele earlier. A great steal coming from Ball State, and being the ninth leading rusher in the country. And of the top 10 rushers, only him and a certain amazing running back from Ole Miss are the only ones returning. So a lot of firepower there. Getting a much more spread offense allows maybe him to hit the holes and be more of a contributor. And that's saying something from what he did at Ball State. So interesting to see how he blends in there. And this was the 4th best offense in the country, but young guys at positions, new guys getting continuity together. The defense, can it be worse than what it was last year? It better not be. They gave up 28.3 points a game last year and 399 yards a game. And ironically, as bad as that sounds, that was actually the sixth best defense in the Pac-12. So people didn't play much defense out there. They gave up 275 yards passing a game, and that was 11th in the Pac-12, and only 11 teams in the country were worse, including North Carolina and Tennessee. Their pass defense is where they got destroyed. Whether it was Washington, or whoever they're playing at the time, they were just throwing it all over UCLA, and that's going to be an issue that Chip Kelly's got to understand. Whether you protect your defense by running the ball a little bit more, not scoring as fast, or maybe they were building up big leads early and they're giving up a lot of pass yards later, but stats-wise, they gave up a ton. And that's going to have to be resolved because if you did watch the UCLA-USC game, Caleb Williams and that USC offense did whatever they wanted to do. There was no way that they had any issues with UCLA. And if you want to actually take the next step and compete, they're going to have to stop somebody. Oregon, Bo Nix is going to be better. Washington's going to be a loaded offense. You have offenses all across the conference that have improved and have better quarterback play. How are you able to stop them and get off the field? That's going to be the biggest problem. Chip Kelly, not just this year, but going forward. You can have Dante Moore, you can have whatever quarterback you want, but if you can't stop anybody at least once during a football game, you're not going to go very far and actually play for a title, much less actually play in the college football playoff successfully. So they've got to address the defense, got to address the pass rush, the secondary, finding ways to build a more team-oriented, if you will, to make that next step. They've shown up the past 2 years. They've had a lot of leadership, but can they go there? They do avoid Oregon and Washington right now in the regular season, but if they get them in the Pac-12 title game, because there is no divisions anymore, obviously, that might be a ticker. Get them to the playoffs, maybe take them to that next level. They're going to have to stop somebody. Their four biggest games, though, are also on the road: at San Diego State, at Utah, at Oregon State, and at USC. How do they survive outside of the Rose Bowl? Obviously, any game in the Rose Bowl is basically a home game for the other team, so they should be well aware of how to deal with adverse conditions. But you're going to have to go on the road and at least win two of those four. San Diego State, I think, they have a pretty good shot at. But when you have to make a trip to Oregon State, Utah, or USC, how can you win one of those two, potentially even two of those three, and take the next step? That's the biggest thing. Chip, this actually might be the biggest year for you because the expectations now are a little bit higher. The past 2 years, you were able to sort of build. You had the veteran quarterback. Now everyone wants to see what you did at Oregon, playing for Pac-12 titles, getting yourself into the college in the BCS. That's where they were at Oregon. They want to see that same success at UCLA, and that's where you've got to take them. I think the floor for this team is 8-4, and the ceiling is 11-1. I think they can beat everybody on their schedule except for USC. I just don't see how they can take down the cross-city rival. But everybody else on the schedule, I think they have a chance of beating them. So anywhere between 8-4 and 11-1 is where I see the Bruins finishing the year.
Yeah. UCLA bringing back 9 starters on that defense there. Most importantly, Latu. I've been working on my Samoan pronunciation.
Good job. Very good job.
Yeah, it's great when one of our top followers on Twitter really helps with the Samoan pronunciations and coaches me along on that one. But his 10.5 sacks coming back, that's huge. He's one of the best pass rushers in college football, and probably because he plays on the West Coast, plays Pac-12 after dark, I don't think he gets enough respect. And maybe it's something that we need to talk about more going through this season. But 10.5 sacks last season, 83 yards for a loss in those 10.5 sacks. That's very, very impressive. UCLA was 3-1 on the road last year. I thought that was kind of when you were sitting there talking about their road schedule, because when I was looking at their schedule coming up this year fresh, I jumped to the exact same conclusion that you came to. That week 4 game at Utah, it's never easy to go into Salt Lake City. I would have to probably go back and look, and maybe when we get to Utah and we talk about them, we need to take a look at what their home record's been to really kind of drive this point home. I think Oregon State's going to be one of the up-and-coming teams in this season. Them and Texas Tech are my 2 top sleeper teams that are kind of outside that top 10. They could really make a run into getting into the top 10 and maybe making a New Year's Six bowl game where we really crash the party. But you're right, that game the weekend before Thanksgiving, technically it's an away game. You're playing at the Coliseum and not at the Rose Bowl, but you're still sleeping in your own bed. So really, is it technically a road game? Not really to me.
The Rose Bowl, they haven't filled that place up with the majority of their own fans in decades at this point. It feels like. Obviously, You probably go back to the early 2000s, so They should be experienced with traveling against road teams and road fans everywhere.
Right. I have them. I'm looking here. I'm having a hard time. I got their floor at 8 wins as well. I don't see them not winning 8 games here. I think there's a lot of very easy winnable games on their schedule. Especially you got both Arizona schools. You got Cal. You got Stanford. You got Washington State, and then a joke of a non-conference schedule. Coastal Carolina. I know that their quarterback's coming back, but San Diego State. I don't want to sleep on them, especially because their stadium is called Snapdragon Stadium, which that's kind of cool to me. But North Carolina Central Eagles, I'm not worried about them in that game. I'm looking at this here. I got them 8 wins. I don't have them getting past 10-2 though. I really can't see them getting to that 11-win mark there. I got them 10-2. Very close area. Like I don't think there's you're not going to have a really bad 6-6 team. You're not going to have a 12-0 team. So I got them at 10-2. That's their best possible record.
Now, before we jump, because obviously this is the last year of the Pac-12 schedule for them before they go to the Big Ten, do you think that they have to get their best, they have to get at least that 10 to 11 wins this season, because when they get to Big Ten, their struggle is going to be significant, especially in a rude welcome to the conference that they might not even see 10 wins for a couple of years until they get their feet under them?
I feel like it's kind of the same thing we need to talk about Oklahoma and Texas as well. I feel like they need to be 9 wins. I won't say that you have to get at 10, but I do feel you need to be at least 9-3 and be a very respectable team coming into the conference.
Yeah, because you see they released the schedules, just recently, and you look at 24 and 25. Who's making the trip out there? I think Ohio State and Nebraska make the trip out to UCLA, and those are basically going to be home games for those two programs. So you're not having to deal with Cal or Colorado traveling to the Rose Bowl in November, October, September. You're having massive fan bases that's going to add to the pressure of winning.
Yeah, because you're looking at games. You got USC. USC's not going anywhere. Ohio State is coming out that way. Nebraska's got, and really Matt Rule really turns around the program in year 2, sorry. You got to travel to the Big House. You got to travel to Iowa. You got to travel to Death Valley and play LSU. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to win this year, really, because next year is going to be a really, really rough year for the Bruins.
Yep, I agree.
So, all right, let's go to our number 19 team in the country. That is the UNC Tar Heels. Man, Fresh. Depends on who you talk to on the Tar Heels. Drake May and the Tar Heels are coming off of a good year. I don't know if I want to call it a great year that they're coming off of here. I'd be pretty happy if I was a Tar Heel fan. The only thing that makes it tough for me coming into this is that loss at the end of the season to wrap it up. I know that you're playing only in the Holiday Bowl against Oregon, losing 28-27 in that game. That was a rough back and forth game. That was one of those games that Oregon, you shouldn't have lost to Oregon in that game, going back to that Holiday Bowl. The Tar Heels schedule, too, is brutal, especially in the first 4 weeks of the season. And it doesn't really it gets easier on the back half, but then you end the season with a really, really tough schedule. This is just their first 4 weeks, ladies and gentlemen. They start neutral stadium against South Carolina. South Carolina, we have them at 23. You play App State. App State's always going to be upset-minded there. You got Minnesota coming into town. Depending on what you think about Minnesota, that could be a tough game. And then you have to travel to Pittsburgh week 4 as well. That's a tough way to start the season for the Tar Heels. But, again, Drake May, possible Heisman candidate there, Fresh. So talk to me a little bit. What are you seeing with UNC?
Well, I think you brought up a really, is the win total actually good for North Carolina football? How do fans actually see it? It's that's actually successful. We're winning ball games. And you kind of look, the way I kind of initially looked at it was they just feel like they're just short of being that quote unquote great team. They're always they're good, but they haven't had that great season yet. They'll get their 8 wins or whatever, but that dominant win. And you kind of look back at